Police officer finds black baby in trash, adopts her. 18 years later, a shocking revelation turns their world upside down. The cold bit through Officer Jack Simmons' uniform as he patrolled the quiet streets of Millbrook, small town on the outskirts of Chicago. It was a frigid February night in 1985, a kind that made even the most hardened criminals think twice about venturing out. Jack's breath formed small clouds in the air as he guided his patrol car through the deserted streets, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. At 43, Jack was a veteran of the Millbrook Police Department. His salt and pepper hair and the lines etched around his blue eyes spoke of years of service, of countless nights just like this one. But nothing in his 2 decades on the force could have prepared him for what he was about to encounter. As Jack turned down Elm Street, a flicker of movement caught his eye. In the beam of his headlights, he saw a stray dog nosing around a pile of trash bags next to an overflowing dumpster. Something about the scene made Jack pause. Maybe it was instinct, honed by years on the job, or maybe it was just a hunch, but he felt compelled to investigate. Pulling the car to a stop, Jack stepped out into the biting cold. The dog, a scraggly mutt, looked up at him warily before scampering off into the shadows. Jack approached the trash pile, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the whistle of the wind. Cry. Weak, muffled, but unmistakably human. Jack's heart began to race as he began to frantically search through the garbage. He tossed aside bag after bag, his movements growing more urgent with each passing second. And then, nestled between 2 trash bags, he saw it. A small cardboard box, moving ever so slightly. With trembling hands, Jack opened the box. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. A tiny baby, no more than a few days old, lay swaddled in a dirty blanket. The infant's skin was a deep ebony, a stark contrast to the pale cardboard and Jack's own fair hand. "Dear God," Jack whispered, his voice catching in his throat. The baby whimpered weakly, its tiny body shivering in the cold. Without hesitation, Jack scooped up the child, cradling it close to his chest. He rushed back to his patrol car, his mind reeling as he radioed for backup and an ambulance. As Jack waited for help to arrive, he held the baby close, trying to warm its frigid little body with his own body heat. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, rocking gently. "You're safe now. I've got you." The wail of sirens pierced the night as an ambulance and several patrol cars converged on the scene. Jack reluctantly handed the baby over to the paramedics, watching anxiously as they worked to stabilize the infant. As his fellow officers began to cordon off the area and search for evidence, Jack found himself unable to tear his eyes away from the ambulance where the baby was being treated. "Jack?" The voice of his partner, Tom Rodriguez, finally broke through his daze. "What happened? Are you okay?" Jack turned to Tom, his face pale and drawn. "I found a baby, Tom. Someone threw away a baby like it was garbage." Tom's eyes widened in shock. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Who would do something like that?" As the initial shock began to wear off, Jack's police training kicked in. He began to mentally catalog everything he'd seen, every detail that might be important for the investigation. The box, the blanket, the exact location, all of it could be crucial in finding out who had abandoned this child. But even as he went through the motions of securing the scene and giving his statement, part of Jack's mind couldn't let go of the image of that tiny, vulnerable baby. In his 20 years on the force, he'd seen a lot of terrible things. But this was different. This struck him to his very core. As the ambulance prepared to leave for the hospital, Jack approached one of the paramedics. "Is the baby going to be okay?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, gave him a small smile. "It's touch and go right now, but babies are surprisingly resilient. We'll do everything we can." Jack nodded, watching as they closed the ambulance doors. As the vehicle pulled away, its sirens cutting through the night, Jack made a silent promise, a tiny life he found in the trash. He would find out who did this, and he would make sure that baby was taken care of, one way or another. Little did Jack know that this cold February night would be the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. The discovery of the abandoned baby would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, love, and justice. As Jack climbed back into his patrol car to follow the ambulance to the hospital, couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a dramatic turn. The image of the baby's tiny face was burned into his memory, and deep in his heart, a protective instinct he'd never known before had awakened. The streets of Millbrook fell silent once more as the last of the sirens faded into the distance. But for Jack Simmons, the night's events would echo through the years to come, shaping his future in ways he could never have imagined. The sterile corridors of Millbrook General Hospital bustled with activity as Jack Simmons made his way to the neonatal intensive care unit. It had been 3 days since he'd found the abandoned baby in the trash, and he'd found himself drawn back to the hospital every day since. As he approached the NICU, a familiar face greeted him. Nurse Sarah Thompson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, smiled warmly at Jack. "Back again, Officer Simmons?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd expected nothing less. Jack nodded, a bit sheepish. "How's our little fighter doing today?" Sarah's smile widened. "Why don't you see for yourself?" She led Jack into the unit, guiding him to a small incubator where the tiny baby lay. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he looked down at the infant. Despite the tubes and monitors surrounding the small body, the baby looked stronger than it had that first night. Its rich, dark skin had a healthier glow, and as Jack watched, the baby's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises that seemed to look right into his soul. "She's a girl," Sarah said softly, "and she's quite the fighter. The doctor says she's making remarkable progress." "She," Jack repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, gently placing his hand on the incubator. "Does she have a name?" Sarah shook her head. "Not officially. We've just been calling her Baby Doe for now." Jack frowned at that. It seemed so impersonal, so cold for this tiny life that had already endured so much. Without really thinking about it, he found himself saying, "Hope. We should call her Hope." Sarah looked at him curiously. "Hope?" Jack nodded, feeling a bit self-conscious. "Because, well, she's a symbol of hope, isn't she? Found in the darkest of circumstances, but fighting to survive, bringing out the best in people." Sarah's eyes softened. "Hope," she repeated. "I think it suits her perfectly." From that moment on, the baby was no longer just another case to Jack. She was Hope, and he found himself inexplicably drawn to her. Every day after his shift, he would come to the hospital, sitting by her incubator, talking to her in soft tones about his day, about the world outside. As days turned into weeks, Hope grew stronger. Jack was there for many of her milestones. The day they removed her from the incubator, the first time she was able to drink from a bottle, burst real smile. Each small victory filled Jack with a joy he'd never experienced before. But as Hope thrived, the investigation into her abandonment seemed to stall. Despite their best efforts, the Millbrook Police Department had found no leads on who might have left her in the trash that cold February night. Jack threw himself into the investigation with a fervor that surprised even his closest colleagues. "Jack, you need to take a step back," Mom said one day, concern evident in his voice. "You're too close to this case." But Jack couldn't step back. The thought of the person who had thrown Hope away, still walking free, haunted him. More than that, he worried about what would happen to Hope once she was released from the hospital. The specter of foster care loomed large, and Jack had seen too many kids get lost in that system. It was during one of his daily visits to Hope, now almost 2 months old, Jack's life took another unexpected turn. As he cradled the baby in his arms, marveling at how she'd grown, Sarah approached him with a serious expression. "Jack," she said softly, "we need to talk about Hope's future. Social services will be coming tomorrow to discuss her placement in foster." Jack felt his heart constrict. The idea of Hope being taken away, of not seeing her every day, was more painful than he'd expected. Before he could think better of it, he blurted out, "What if I took her?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "You? Jack, are you sure? Taking in a child, especially one with Hope's background, it's a huge responsibility." Jack looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep in his arms, her tiny hand clutching his finger. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't let her go. "I'm sure," he said, his voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes. She belongs with me, Sarah. I can feel it." process that followed was a whirlwind of paperwork, home visits, and background checks. Jack's status as a police officer helped smooth some of the bureaucratic hurdles, but it was still a challenging journey. His fellow officers rallied around him, offering support and help as he prepared to become a single father. There were moments of doubt, of course. Jack would wake up in the middle of the night, panicked at the thought of being responsible for a tiny life. He'd never even been married, let alone had children. What did he know about raising a baby, especially one who'd been through so much trauma? But every time he held Hope, every time she looked up at him with those big brown eyes, his doubts would melt away. This was right. This was meant to be. Finally, 3 months after that fateful February night, Jack brought Hope home. As he carried her into his modest house, now outfitted with a crib, changing table, and more stuffed animals than he'd ever seen in one place, he felt a profound sense of rightness. "Welcome home, Hope," he whispered, kissing her forehead gently. That night, as Jack sat in the rocking chair in Hope's nursery, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in her crib, he marveled at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He'd gone from a confirmed bachelor married to his job to a father, responsible for this precious life. As he drifted off to sleep, lulled by the soft sounds of Hope's breathing, Jack had no idea of the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Couldn't have imagined the sleepless nights, the first steps, first words, first day of school that were yet to come. Nor could he have foreseen the difficulties they would face as an interracial family in a small Midwestern town, or the unbreakable bond that would form between them. All Jack knew in that moment was that he loved this little girl more than he'd ever thought possible, and that he would do anything to protect her and give her the life she deserved. Little did he know that the greatest test of that love was still to come, waiting for them in the years ahead. The years seemed to fly by in a whirlwind of firsts and milestones. Hope's first word, Dada, much to Jack's delight. Her first steps, wobbly but determined just like her. Her first day of school, terrifying for Jack, exciting for Hope. Before Jack knew it, Hope was celebrating her 10th birthday. A vibrant, curious girl with a smile that could light up a room. As Hope grew, so did the challenges they faced as a family. Millbrook was a small town, and while many embraced Jack and Hope, there were always whispers, sideways glances, and occasional outright hostility. Jack had known it wouldn't be easy raising a black daughter as a white single father in a predominantly white community, but the reality was often harder than he'd imagined. There was the time Hope came home from second grade in tears because a classmate had told her Jack couldn't be her real dad because they didn't look alike. Or the suspicious looks they'd get when out shopping, as if people couldn't fathom that they were family. Each incident broke Jack's heart a little, but it also strengthened his resolve to create a world where Hope could thrive. Jack threw himself into educating both himself and Hope about her heritage. He reached out to African American colleagues for advice, filled their home with books about Black history and culture, and made sure Hope had positive role models who looked like her. It wasn't always easy, and Jack often felt out of his depth, but he was determined to give Hope a strong sense of identity and pride in her roots. On Hope's 10th birthday, as Jack watched her blow out the candles on her cake, surrounded by a mix of family friends and her own school friends, felt a swell of pride. Despite the challenges, Hope was growing into a confident, compassionate young girl. Her laugh was infectious, curiosity boundless, and her heart big enough to encompass everyone she met. But even as Jack celebrated Hope's growth, a nagging worry gnawed at him. The case of Hope's abandonment had long since gone cold, filed away as an unsolved mystery. Yet Jack couldn't let it go. Every year on the anniversary of the night he found her, he would pull out the case file, poring over the details, hoping for some clue he might have missed. It was during one of these late-night reviews, just a few days after Hope's 10th birthday, that Jack's world was turned upside down once again. Phone rang, startling Jack from his concentration. Glancing at the clock, it was nearly midnight. He felt a flutter of anxiety. Late-night calls were rarely good news for a police officer. "Simmons," he answered, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Hope. "Jack, it's Tom." His partner's voice was tight, urgent. "You need to come down to the station, now." "What's going on, Tom?" Jack asked, already reaching for his shoes. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's about Hope, Jack. We've got a lead." Jack felt his heart stop for a moment. "I'll be right there," he managed to say before hanging up. After arranging for his neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, to keep an ear out for Hope, Jack rushed to the police station. The normally quiet building was a hive of activity, even at this late hour. Tom met him at the door, his face grave. "Jack, you better sit down for this." In the conference room, Jack listened in stunned silence as Tom laid out the facts. A woman named Letitia Williams had turned herself in, claiming to be Hope's biological mother. She had provided details about the night of Hope's abandonment that only the true mother could have known. "She says she was young, scared, and addicted to drugs," Tom explained gently. "She's been clean for 5 years now and wants to make amends." Jack felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. For 10 years he dreamed of solving this case, finding answers for Hope. But now that the moment had arrived, he found himself terrified of what it might mean. Does she want Hope back?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom shook his head. "She says she knows she gave up that right, but she does want to meet Hope, to explain, to ask for forgiveness." Over the next few weeks, Jack's world became a whirlwind of legal consultations, counseling sessions, and soul-searching conversations. The question of whether to tell Hope about her biological mother weighed heavily on him. On one hand, Hope had a right to know about her origins, to have answers to the questions that had always lingered unspoken between them. On the other, Jack feared how this revelation might affect her, how it might change the bond they shared. In the end, it was Hope herself who made the decision inevitable. One evening, as they sat together on the porch swing, Hope turned to Jack with those big brown eyes that could still melt his heart. "Dad," he said softly, "where did I come from? I mean, I know you found me, but who are my real parents?" Jack felt his throat tighten. He'd known this day would come, had prepared for it, but nothing could have truly readied him for the reality of this moment. Taking a deep breath, Jack began to tell Hope the truth, all of it. He spoke of the night he found her, of the years of searching for answers. And finally, he told her about Letitia Williams, the woman who claimed to be her biological mother. Hope listened in silence, her young face a canvas of emotions, confusion, anger, sadness, and a flicker of something Jack couldn't quite identify. Hope. When Jack finished speaking, Hope was quiet for a long moment. Then in a small voice she asked, "Do I have to go live with her now?" Jack pulled Hope into a fierce hug, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. "No, sweetheart. No matter what, you're my daughter. Nothing will ever change that." Hope clung to him, small body shaking with sobs. "I don't want another mom," she cried. "I just want you, Dad." As Jack held his daughter, murmuring words of comfort, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be difficult conversations, emotional upheavals, and hard choices to make. But he also knew that the love between him and Hope was strong enough to weather any storm. What Jack couldn't have known in that moment was that the appearance of Hope's biological mother was just the beginning. The true test of their bond, and the tragic turn that would shake their world to its core, was still to come. Following months were a whirlwind of emotions for both Jack and Hope. After much discussion and consultation with child psychologists, they decided to move forward with a supervised meeting between Hope and Letitia Williams, her biological mother. The day of the meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumult of emotions swirling within the Simmons household. Hope, now 11, sat at the kitchen table, pushing her breakfast around her plate, her usual appetite nowhere to be seen. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready, sweetheart," Jack said gently, his heart aching at the sight of his daughter's distress. Hope looked up, her brown eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I want to, Dad. I need to know." The meeting was held in a neutral setting, quiet room at the local community center. As they walked in, Jack felt Hope's small hand tighten around his own. Seated at a table was a woman in her early 30s, her dark skin a shade lighter than Hope's, her eyes the same warm brown. Letitia Williams stood as they entered, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "Hello, Hope," she said softly, her voice catching. I'm your mother." What followed was an emotional and often difficult conversation. Letitia explained her circumstances at the time of Hope's birth. Her addiction, her fear, her misguided belief that Hope would be better off without her. She spoke of her journey to sobriety, of the guilt that had haunted her for years, and of her desire to make amends. Hope listened silently, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. When Letitia finished speaking, Hope asked the question that had been burning inside her for so long. "Why didn't you want me?" The raw pain in Hope's voice brought tears to everyone's eyes. Letitia reached out, stopping short of touching Hope. "I did want you, baby. I wanted you so much. But I was sick and scared, and I made a terrible mistake. Not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted it." As the meeting progressed, Jack watched with a mixture of pride and heartache as Hope navigated this complex situation with a maturity beyond her years. She asked thoughtful questions, expressed her feelings honestly, and even, towards the end, allowed Letitia to give her a brief hug. In the car ride home, Hope was quiet, lost in thought. Finally, she turned to Jack. "Dad, is it okay if I'm angry at her, but also feel sorry for her at the same time?" Jack felt a surge of love for his wise, compassionate daughter. "Of course it is, sweetheart. Feelings are complicated sometimes. It's okay to feel however you feel." Over the next few years, Hope and Letitia developed a cautious relationship. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks, arguments, and tears, but there were also moments of connection, understanding, and even joy. Through it all, the bond between Jack and Hope remained unshakable. If anything, navigating this new dynamic together seemed to strengthen their relationship. Hope's unwavering assertion that Jack was her real dad, regardless of biology, filled him with a pride and love he could barely contain. As Hope entered her teenage years, she blossomed into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. She excelled in school, particularly in science and math. She was active in social justice causes, inspired by her own unique family situation, fight for equality and understanding. Jack, now in his late 50s, watched his daughter's growth with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of how quickly time was passing. He had recently been promoted to chief of police, a position that brought new responsibilities and challenges. It was shortly after Hope's 16th birthday the tragic news struck. Jack was at work when he received the call. There had been a car accident. Letitia Williams had been killed instantly. The news hit Hope hard. Despite the complexity of their relationship, she had grown to care for Letitia. The loss reopened old wounds, bringing to the surface feelings of abandonment and grief that Hope thought she had resolved. In the wake of the tragedy, Hope threw herself into her schoolwork with an intensity that worried Jack. She spent long hours studying, rarely going out with friends. Jack did his best to support her, to give her space while also letting her know he was there whenever she needed him. One night, several months after Letitia's death, Jack found Hope sitting on the porch swing, tears streaming down her face. Without a word, he sat beside her and pulled her into his arms, just as he had done when she was a little girl. "I'm so angry, Dad," Hope sobbed. "I'm angry at her for leaving me twice, for dying before we could. Before I could." "Before you could fully forgive her?" Jack finished gently. Hope nodded against his chest. "Is that terrible of me?" "No, sweetheart, it's human. Grief is complicated, especially in situations like this." They sat in silence for a while, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound. Finally, Hope spoke again, her voice small. "Dad, I'm scared." "Of what, honey?" "Of losing you too. You're all I have left." Jack's heart clenched at the fear in his daughter's voice. He pulled back slightly, looking into Hope's tear-stained face. "Hope, listen to me. I can't promise that nothing will ever happen to me, but I can promise you this: you will never be alone. You are strong and brave and surrounded by people who love you. No matter what happens, you will always have a family." Hope managed a watery smile. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you could ever know." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's embrace, neither Jack nor Hope could have anticipated the shocking revelation that was just around the corner. A discovery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about Hope's origins and test the strength of their bond like never before. The years seemed to fly by, and before Jack knew it, Hope was preparing to graduate high school. At 18, she had grown into a beautiful, intelligent young woman with a bright future ahead of her. She had been accepted to several prestigious universities and had decided to pursue a degree in forensic science, inspired by Jack's career in law enforcement. As Jack helped Hope pack for college, couldn't help but reflect on the journey they had shared. From that cold February night when he found her in the trash to this moment, preparing to send her out into the world, their bond had only grown stronger with each passing year. The night before Hope was set to leave for college, Jack decided it was time to give her something he had been holding on to for years. After dinner, he sat Hope down in the living room, a small, worn box in his hands. "Hope," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this. I think that time is now." Hope looked at him curiously as he handed her the box. Inside, she found a collection of items. The blanket she had been wrapped in when Jack found her, newspaper clippings about her discovery and adoption, and a letter. "What's this, Dad?" Hope asked, holding up the sealed envelope. Jack took a deep breath. "That's a letter I wrote to you the night I brought you home. I promised myself I'd give it to you when you were old enough to understand everything." With trembling hands, Hope opened the letter and began to read. "My dearest Hope, as I write this, you're sleeping peacefully in your crib, unaware of the journey that brought you into my life. One day, when you're old enough, I'll tell you the full story of how I found you. But what I want you to know now, and I hope you'll carry with you always, is this. From the moment I held you in my arms, I knew you were meant to be my daughter. I don't know what challenges we'll face as you grow up. I don't know if I'll always have the right answers or make the right decisions. But I promise you this, I will love you unconditionally, protect you fiercely, and support you endlessly. You are, and always will be, the greatest gift of my life. No matter what the future holds, no matter what you discover about your past, never forget that you are loved, you are wanted, and you are home. All my love, Dad." By the time Hope finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. She looked up at Jack, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, throwing her arms around him. As they embraced, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. Despite all the challenges they had faced, all the doubts and fears, they had made it. Hope was strong, confident, and ready to take on the world. But life, as Jack had learned long ago, often had other plans. 2 weeks after Hope left for college, Jack received a call that would shake their world to its core. It was from Tom, his old partner, now the deputy chief. "Jack," Tom's voice was grave, "you need to come down to the station. There's been a development in Hope's case." Jack's heart raced as he rushed to the police station. When he arrived, he found Tom waiting for him with a grim expression. "Jack, sit down," Tom said, gesturing to a chair. "We've received some new information about Hope's biological parents." Jack listened in stunned silence as Tom explained. A man had come forward, claiming to be Hope's biological father. DNA tests had confirmed his claim. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The man, David Carter, was white. "That's impossible," Jack stammered. "Letitia Williams." Tom shook his head. "Letitia wasn't Hope's biological mother, Jack. She was paid by the real parents to take the fall if the case ever resurfaced." Jack felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath him. Everything they thought they knew about Hope's origins had been a lie. Over the next few days, the full story emerged. Hope's biological parents had been a young interracial couple, David Carter and a woman named Amelia Jackson. They had been college students, unprepared for parenthood. In a moment of panic and poor judgment, they had abandoned their baby, then spent years racked with guilt over their decision. Amelia had passed away from cancer a few years earlier, but on her deathbed, she had made David promise to find their daughter and make things right. Jack's mind reeled as he tried to process this information. How would this affect Hope? How would it change their relationship? With a heavy heart, Jack called Hope and asked her to come home for the weekend. When she arrived, he sat her down and, with Tom's help, explained everything they had learned. Hope listened in shocked silence, her face a whirlwind of emotions. When Jack finished speaking, she stood up abruptly and walked out of the house without a word. Jack found her an hour later, sitting on the same porch swing where they had shared so many important conversations over the years. "Hope," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "It doesn't change anything," Hope said fiercely, turning to look at him. "You're my dad. You've always been my dad, and you always will be." Jack felt tears prick his eyes. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, pulling her into a hug. Over the next few months, Hope grappled with this new information about her past. She met David Carter, learning about her biological parents and her heritage. It was a difficult and emotional process. Through it all, the bond between Hope and Jack remained unshakable. As Hope's freshman year of college came to a close, she made a decision that would set the course for her future. She changed her major to social work, the focus on adoption and foster care. "I want to help other kids like me, Dad," she explained to Jack. "I want to make sure they find their way to people who will love them as much as you've loved me." Jack couldn't have been prouder. Despite all the twists and turns, all the revelations and challenges, Hope had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and determined to make a difference in the world. Years later, at Hope's college graduation, Jack sat in the audience, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his daughter accept her diploma. As Hope scanned the crowd, her eyes met his, and she broke into a radiant smile. In that moment, Jack thought back to that cold February night so many years ago. He thought of the tiny baby he had found discarded in the trash and the beautiful, strong woman she had become. He thought of all the challenges they had faced, all the love they had shared, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that every moment had been worth it. That night, he hadn't just saved a baby. He had found his purpose, his joy, his hope. As Hope made her way towards him after the ceremony, her graduation robe billowing behind her, Jack opened his arms wide. And as she rushed into his embrace, just as she had done countless times over the years, Jack knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because in the end, it wasn't biology or circumstances that made a family. It was love. And love, Jack had learned, could overcome anything.